Hi, everybody. I'm Arnold Schmidt. I'm a professor of English and film and creative writing at California State University Stanislaus. I'm here with Randy Siefkin, and we're really excited to talk to you about what has been called the greatest political film of all time, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
And welcome to our mini election series. 2 films in our series. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is number 1. And then later on this month, Alexander Payne's film, Election. I taught political science at Modesto Junior College for a number of years. I now serve longtime service on the board of the historic nonprofit, mission-driven, community-based State Theater, soon to reopen its doors, we hope.
That's it. That's it. And if the doors aren't open, you can always get popcorn on Friday afternoons.
That's right.
And you get to see Kirsty dressed up as a popcorn.
That's right.
Which is worth the money in and of itself. We're joined by Larry Giventer, who is a professor of poli-sci at Cal State Stanislaus. So he's going to talk later on in this session about the filibuster, and then the 3 of us will be live for the discussion of the film next week. So I'm gonna take us through, okay, a little bit about Larry, a little bit about Randy, and we're gonna talk quite a lot about Frank Capra. Frank Capra is a really interesting director. He's Italian, he's Italian-American, he comes over from Sicily. His autobiography has pretty excruciating details about traveling over in steerage with the family and everything. So he has his is a real American immigrant story. It's a big family, and everybody. It's kind of funny. They're all pretty much working class. And he decides that he wants to go on to college. He's the only one who's college educated. He eventually goes to Caltech, puts himself through college, working at different jobs, including work at the school. But then when he graduates, ironically, everybody else in his family who are basically blue collar workers all have jobs. And of course, he can't find a job, even though he's college educated. So he travels around, he hitchhikes, he rides the rails, he does lots of different kinds of jobs all over the country for a couple of years. And then he finally convinces a director in a film company in San Francisco that he can be a film director. And he tells him he's done it before, and of course, there it is. So he gets his first job, and he actually is very successful right off the bat. He works with a number of people who become very big stars. Harry Langdon, Claudia Colbert, Douglas Fairbanks. He does a series of feature films with Harry Langdon, and they're very successful. He has a falling out with Langdon, and Langdon goes off and does his own, kind of starts doing things his own way, and it has less success. So critics really see Capra as, in a certain sense, helping him make Langdon make his persona as this kind of naïve, this innocent, quirky kind of transgressive character. Capra worked with Claudette Colbert, Douglas Fairbanks. Then he moves into the sound era, and because of his technical background, because he had gone to Caltech, he actually has an engineering degree. He makes the transition to sound very well. There's a wonderful quote from a cinematographer who works with him, who said, "Other directors just walk around the set and don't know what they're doing and look like they're going to bump into things, and Capra actually knows how things work." So he's quite successful in making the transition from silent film to sound. He does a series of films that we're going to talk about this, right now. It Happened One Night in 1934. Mr. Deeds Goes to Town in 36, and You Can't Take It With You. All of these are Oscar winners for him. He wins Best Director. And he does a series of documentaries during the war, and he wins an Oscar for that as well. He's also known for It's a Wonderful Life, the kind of perennial Christmas a favorite that is usually at the State as well as everywhere else, sometime in mid-December. And of course, for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which was nominated but didn't win. Oh, I know. I'm sorry. It does. So, but in any event, so these are the films that we're gonna kind of touch on. So the three Academy Awards that he does win: Best Director for It Happened One Night, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, and You Can't Take It With You. It Happened One Night, critics, scholars will say, is really one of the first, if not the first, screwball comedies. And screwball comedy is a particular kind of comedy that happens, in the 30s. It features female characters who have agency, who have actual desire, and who act on it. So the female characters in screwball comedies tend to be much more lively and much more much more important in terms of advancing the plot. And here, we get It Happened One Night. We get this sequence with Claudette Colbert is this millionaires, and Clark Gable meets her, and it goes on, and she's hiding from her dad, and he's a newspaper man, and he's going to get the story, and they obviously fall in love, but they toward the end of this, it turns out like, oh, she thinks he's in it for her money, and he's not. So there's a famous breakup scene, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But here, what you're seeing is there's a famous hitchhiking scene, and he's hitching and can't possibly. He's trying to show her, I'm a man, I know how to do this, and they can't get a ride. She goes out there and lifts her skirt up and shows her calf, and of course the car stops. The next film to talk about here is Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. And again, we get, this is Gary Cooper. He inherits $20 million. And so he goes into, moves to the city, and different people are trying to take advantage of him. There's some political shenanigans that go on. And again, a comedy. And then You Can't Take It With You, which is a wonderful George F. Kaufman and Moss Hart play that was very successful. And the movie is just this kind of crazy family who are all inventors and very creative. And it really comes down to this idea of, even though you have a lot of money, what are the other things in life that will make life worth living and make it a lot of fun. So all three of these are great films, and really interesting to talk about. Another film that is really important for Capra is Meet John Doe, which is in some ways a very dark film. It's about a reporter who writes this story about, she's getting ready to lose her job. So she's like, oh, I'm going to write this story about this guy who's, the world is so terrible, he's going to kill himself in protest. And of course, she's made all this up. So then they try to make a publicity stunt to find a guy who will say that he is this person. And they find somebody, and it goes on, and he becomes a hero. They form these John Doe societies of people who are just be good to your neighbor and all this. It's really positive. But then, somebody comes out and get him. They say bad things about him, and all of it is going to crash down. And at the end of the movie, he's getting ready to kill himself, and you'll have to watch the movie to see if he does. But of course, it is a comedy. But it is also, I think, at least for me, I think it's Capra's darkest film, a real black comedy. The film that many people know is maybe the most popular or most famous is It's a Wonderful Life, because it plays so much at Christmas time. And it's about George Bailey fighting, his small bank against a big bank, a big landlord, and all of this. So all of these films generally are going to talk about issues of the individual, the little guy fighting the system in one way or another. And now Randy's going to talk a little bit about the film itself.
So this is my task, to talk a bit about the film and the cast of the film. I like to begin by talking a bit about the response to the film, the reaction to the film, which was both positive and negative. Generally, this film is classified as a classic, one of the best political films, if not the best films of all time. It was among the first 25 films to be designated for preservation by the National Film Registry. It was nominated for 11 Academy Award nominations, only won one, and that was for Best Original Story. It's actually moved up in the AFI list of best movies. I think it was 29th. The first time they listed the top 100, it's moved up to 26. Jefferson Smith, played by Jimmy Stewart, is regarded as one of the best heroes of all time. Great Rotten Tomato ratings. The film has the Capra touch, which I think we'll debate about exactly what that is. The sets are meticulous, recreated exactly in Hollywood based on the Senate chamber. In fact, Capra hired the Senate secretary as an advisor on the film to make sure that all of the details were correct. The cinematography by Joe Walker, absolutely superb. Walker is noted, among other things, for inventing the zoom lens and for fashioning specific lenses for specific actors and actresses, and memorable casting. Capra believed that the actors told his story, so he was very careful about how he cast his films. He didn't use the normal, here, play the script and we'll decide. He interviewed everyone, and I think there are 186 or 187 different speaking roles in this film, and he claims to have interviewed all of them. I'm not quite sure that he did, and he spent time with each of them explaining to them what they were doing. He was known as an actor's director. He wasn't a tyrant on the screen. He really worked to bring out the best. And he once said, in my movies, everybody is a star, which is, I think, you don't hear many directors who say that. But the reviews were positive generally. I'm not sure that I would agree it's as great as Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, but you see some of the accolades that the film received here on the screen. One of the things that I wasn't aware of, or only vaguely so, was that this film, you see to your right, the French promotional poster for Mr. Smith au Sénat. It was the last American film to play in France before the Nazis said no more American films. And it played for weeks and weeks and weeks to standing room only audiences who stood and cheered when Jimmy Stewart went through the filibuster exercise. So the cast. Now, I should point out not all the reviews were universally praising. The Senate Majority Leader, Alben Barkley, who was later vice president under Harry Truman, accused the film of being silly and stupid and made the Senate look like a bunch of crooks. He especially objects to Jean Arthur's signals to Jimmy Stewart on the floor of the Senate as being totally implausible and violative of all Senate rules. John F. Kennedy's father, Joe Kennedy, who was then the ambassador to the court of St. James in Great Britain, decried the film as detrimental to America's prestige in Europe and ought to be withdrawn. The Boy Scouts did not like to have their reputation besmirched, and they refused to allow Capra to use Boy Scouts, so he had to invent the fictitious name of the Boy Rangers rather than the Boy Scouts. I love this comment by Senator James Burns, exactly the kind of picture that directors of totalitarian governments would like to have their subjects believe exist in a democracy. Capra claims in his book, and there's not a whole lot of evidence for this, but there was a special premiere for the Washington Press Corps at the Press Club, which is also recreated in the film, by the way. And a number of the reporters and senators walked out before the final scenes of the film. So there was more controversy than you generally see today. The lead in this film, of course, was Jimmy Stewart. The film was made by Columbia Studio, which was a Poverty Row studio. It wasn't an MGM, it wasn't a Warner Brothers, it wasn't a high budget enterprise. Harry Cohn insisted that his directors come in on budget and on time. The only major star in the Columbia stable was Jimmy Stewart. The other stars had to be borrowed from other studios, and Capra generally had so much success with them that they came back and wanted more money. But one of the things that attracted Stewart to the role was that he was totally absorbed by the character of Smith and felt he epitomized Abraham Lincoln. Interesting laugh, Jean Arthur, his co-star, said that Gary Cooper would have been a much better Mr. Smith because Jimmy Stewart was too ready to spill out everything in front of a camera. Smith was supposedly the odds-on favorite to win the Oscar for the best film of 1939. Unfortunately, his competition included some guy named Clark Gable. And so he had to wait until 1940 when he did win the Oscar for Philadelphia Story. His co-star was Jean Arthur as Saunders, the reporter, the cynical reporter, who began her career in silent films. As Arnold has pointed out, she was in Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, and You Can't Take It With You. Capra said she had a bad side physically to her, so they had to make sure that the sets were arranged in such a fashion that we only saw her good side, thanks to the wonders of Joe, the cinematographer. Claude Rains as Senator Joe Payne. Notable previous roles in The Invisible Man and Robin Hood, two of my favorites from the 1930s. Received an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Stewart's biographer, one of his biographers, describes his role as one of the most haphazard in his career because he plays the patrician white knight and then at the end of the film becomes a raving lunatic. I'm not sure I agree with that assessment, but there it is. Harry Carey as the vice president. Film career went back to 1908, often cast in John Ford Westerns as a cowboy, was not the first choice to play the vice president. The person who was declined the role because he thought it was insignificant. Only had about 20 to 23 lines, I think, in total. But as a result of his characterization and his delivery and his presence and his resemblance to a Midwestern Democrat who looked like he'd been born to carry the Capitol around on his back, I'm not quite sure what that means. He did receive, along with Claude Rains, a nomination for Best Supporting Actor. H.V. Kaltenborn. Every time I say that name, I remember Harry Truman following the 1948 upset election. Making fun of H.V., who had this very distinctive, H.V. Kaltenborn here, very distinctive speaking style. and mimicking Kaltenborn on election night, who predicted that Thomas Dewey would be the next president of the United States. But he was known for his highly precise diction. He had a vast knowledge of world affairs. He personally met with Adolf Hitler and a number of other world leaders. And he made one of the promotions for this film. And you'll note that he makes comments about the filibuster as a democracy's finest show. And we'll talk more about whether, in fact, that's the case or this is a highly stylized representation of it. Boss Taylor, played by Edward Arnold, one of the characters who shows up again and again and again in Capra films. Again, a long career in silent films, 150 films as a character actor. You Can't Take It With You, where he changes from the corrupt banker to a much more understanding and caring person, who I think winds up playing the harmonica, if I'm not mistaken, in that film. I love his comment, the bigger I got, the better character roles I received. So you see, Capra played a great deal of attention to the characters in his film, the character actors, including the next one, Diz Moore, the member of the press and good friend of Saunders, who played, I remember him in Stagecoach. He was in Gone with the Wind. He was in hundreds of films. He was the first actor to win the Triple Crown of Acting, an Oscar, an Emmy, and a Tony. Best Supporting Actor in Stagecoach, and who said, I didn't think I was that good. By the way, the press was rather critical of him, and the portrayal of the press generally as a bunch of people who drank way too much. Other cast members, again, I pointed out there were 186 or 187 speaking parts in the film, which is really pretty remarkable. Here's Boss Taylor on the right, and his assistant, Eugene Pallette, who were giving advice, more than advice, to Governor Hopper, again played by character actor Guy Kibbe, about the Senate appointment, and Senator Payne, the White Knight, looks on. The Smiths keep going to Washington, D.C., which I think suggests the residual impact of this film. On the left, you see Billy Jack Goes to Washington, a Tom Laughlin 1977 production, produced incidentally by Frank Capra Jr. A documentary next to that, Can Mr. Smith Get to Washington Anymore? A good question to ask in our post-film discussion. And on the right, you may recognize, yes, that's Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. Fess Parker, who in 1962 and 1963 played in a film called, or television series, ABC television series, called Mr. and Mrs. Smith Go to Washington. There was a planned sequel to this film called Mr. Smith Starts a Riot. Columbia planned it and then decided not to go through it. Might have gone better today, actually. Also in consideration was a sequel starring Jane Wyman in the role of Mrs. Smith Goes to Washington. And if you're an Eddie Murphy fan, you may remember the film The Distinguished Gentleman, which is a loosely based remake of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And now for a bit of context for this 1939 film, we go back to Arnold.
Hey, everybody. And thank you, Randy, for all that. Just want to kind of situate the film in a particular historical moment. you know, looking at a kind of a quick timeline here, you can see that 1939 is a hugely, you know, is the beginning of the war. There's the pre-war issues that have gone on in Ethiopia, the Spanish Civil War, and the Chinese invasion of China. And the film itself, so Germany invades Poland in September 1st, 39. The film is actually in production from April to July of 39 and premieres in October. And there's a wonderful moment in the film when Stewart says, well, actually, I think it might be one of the reporters. They're talking about who's in the audience to watch the filibuster. And the filibuster, as Randy says, is described as democracy's best moment. And it says something like, there are representatives of two totalitarian dictatorships in our audience today getting to see America at its best. And I assume that would be, you know, representatives of fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. So it has these little echoes of current events. Capra himself left Hollywood and joined the service and made a series of films called Why We Fight. They're all available on YouTube. They're really interesting. And what he was doing, what the War Department wanted him to do, was to make movies that would explain to the soldiers that were being drafted or that were enlisting what the war was all about. And this included African-American soldiers. So a very interesting series of films, and they were you know, won awards, and he was certainly you know, recognized for this. So Mr. Smith itself is a very optimistic film. He's this an average everyday guy. He's incredibly naive. He believes the best things of America, and he shows up in town, and he has struggles, but he does ultimately triumph over corrupt interests. And some people really see the film in that way. At the same time, others, and in that, you know, we see when he first gets to Washington, he's driving around town and in a cab, and he's stopping every few minutes. Oh, look at this, look at that, as he sees different monuments or things like that. And he's very taken by the Capitol Dome, as he says, especially at night. He goes to the Lincoln Memorial a number of times, and the first time he's there is a really powerful scene. The area is full of immigrants, and you know, they're all different people from all different parts of the world, and you know, that he's reading the Gettysburg Address, and it's very, very moving. One of the other things that I would mention about the way that Stewart is shot is all the way through the whole first half of the movie until he gets into court, he's always shot from below. Now, he's a tall guy, but he's always shot, we always look up to him, and the camera always looks up to him. And there's a sequence that I'll show you later on when he's on the Senate floor where the camera's actually looking down on him because he's in so much trouble. But in this scene with Lincoln, we look up to the Lincoln, the statue of Lincoln. We look up to the Gettysburg Address, and as I said, through the pretty much the first half, almost 2/3 of the film, we look up to Stewart as well. At the same time, other critics see this as an incredibly pessimistic film. On the one hand, there's only a few main characters who are honest. There's the boys that are helping, there's Saunders, and there's Smith, and everybody else is just a bunch of crooks. The politicians are rotten, the journalists are corrupt, nobody's in it, they're in it for the money, they don't believe in truth. So that's, the institutions are all really negative. At the same time, the people, the voters, are presented as easily manipulated. The political bosses are able to, with a few parades and a few speeches, generate lots of telegrams and, get people out in the street to support a corrupt administration. And at the same time, there are a few, people, once the boys get the word out about what's really going on, there are people who take Smith's side, but even the police are, there's a scene of them hosing down a demonstration of supporting Smith. So in a certain sense, the targets of the film are all of the institutions of American life, the police, the government, the journalists, and even the voter. So in some ways, it's a very dark. It can be seen as a very dark film. I think what makes it work, what makes it interesting, is that it oscillates between these two. We can see it both ways. So here, this is an instance of Stewart reading a rule that allows him to kind of maintain his filibuster. You notice we're looking up at him, and you'll notice the little bit of halo lighting around the back of his head. That gives him that gives him a little emphasis there. At the same time, as things go badly, we see him. All of these. Telegrams have come in. They've basically been, people who are against him. It seems that they've been manufactured by the bosses, and we get this kind of, in a certain sense, a low point of the film in terms of his attitude toward, his hope that the American dream, the American political system will survive. Capra, as a director, is known for something that people call Capricorn. I tend to like it. Critics use it as a derogatory term. He can be very corny. As I said earlier, he comes out of silent comedy. And I'll give you a few examples of this that in films that we've been talking about. One of the instances that you'll remember if you've seen It's a Wonderful Life is every time Jimmy Stewart runs up and down the staircase in his house, he gets to the bottom of the stairs and he grabs the banister and the piece comes off in his hand. And the joke all the way through is that he's an honest guy. He can't even afford to have, work done around the house. The image that I have here of the top, he's, one of the first times that he does this, he's realizing, I have a family, I'm not making a lot of money. Am I doing the right thing? Should I kind of sell out, get money, help my family? And you can see it's a very, on the top, when he picks up this piece from the banister, it's signaling in a certain sense a kind of a failure. And on the bottom, he's just come in, he's covered with snow, you can see it in his hair. So he's already had his experience with the angel. He already knows that life is, his values are good. And when he sees it, it reminds him of, oh, I used to worry about money, but I don't do that anymore. And in the film, it happens a number of times. It's a running joke. In Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, we see the scene with Stewart and Claude Rains. He meets Claude Rains' attractive daughter, and she's really kind of flirting with him, and he is all flustered. And there's a whole sequence with him holding his hat, dropping his hat, holding the hat behind his back. And then he goes to leave, and he trips over a table and knocks over a lamp. It's all very, very comic. It's all the kind of thing that you would see out of any kind of a silent film with Harold Lloyd or Charlie Chaplin. Another example of this is in It Happened One Night with Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert. And the running joke is that it's a romantic comedy, right? So they meet and they don't like each other. And that's how you know they're going to end up together. So all the way through, they have to, they're together, they're fighting, they're arguing. And of course, they're falling in love. So they're in the hotel and they have to stay together, and they're pretending, that she's trying to escape. So they're kind of hiding. And of course they're staying in the same room, and it's like, oh my God, but they're not married. So he says, well, we'll hang a curtain between the two beds. And that curtain is what he calls the walls of Jericho. And so we get these scenes, the scene comes up a couple of times. First, we see him putting it up on the top left. We see them, in the morning where they're talking about it on the top right. But then at the end of the movie, they go back to the same hotel. They go back to the owners, and the conversation you see on the bottom left is the hotel owner telling his wife, "These people are really strange. They wanted a blanket and a rope and a horn." And then, of course, we hear the horn blowing, and of course, the biblical story. The horn blows, and the walls of Jericho come down. The last shot on the bottom right is the blanket coming down, indicating that their relationship is now going to move to another level. So that's what we've got for you for this evening. We hope that you will join us for Election, which is directed by Andrew Payne, who did a whole bunch of good films. Citizen Ruth about Schmidt, Sideways, The Descendants. A favorite of mine, Nebraska, is a really good film, and Downsizing more recently. And of course, Reese Witherspoon, who won 2 Oscars for Walk the Line and Wild. And it also stars Mathew Broderick from Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Biloxi Blues and Glory. We hope that you enjoy this, and we hope to see you at our next event. In a minute, we're going to hear from Larry, who's going to talk to us about the filibuster, a history of it, and in a certain sense, what's going to happen with it in next year.
It's suddenly become an issue in this year's campaign.
Yeah. So, and now, without further ado, here's Larry.
Welcome to the Modesto State Theater's presentation of Frank Capra's classic film, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Hi, my name is Larry Giventer, and I'll be speaking with you in 2 parts about this film. This is part 1, the politics in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Part 2 will address the filibuster. I invite you to pay attention to 3 parts of this film in particular. First, look at Mr. Smith's arrival in Washington, D.C. Next, pay attention to Smith's filibuster on the U.S. Senate. And third, let's pay attention to the climactic ending of the film. Upon arriving in Washington, Mr. Smith boards a tour bus. Here he is at the Lincoln Memorial. He gazes in boyish, wide-eyed, open-mouthed wonderment as he tours the artifacts, the icons, and venues that venerate and symbolize the American story, all accompanied by a medley of patriotic music. You see, Mr. Smith is enthralled by the myth of American exceptionalism. He exhibits an unquestioning patriotic, wrapped-in-the-flag reverence for America and its institutions. American exceptionalism is the theory that the history of the United States is inherently different from that of other nations. There is a unique American ideology based on liberty, equality before the law, rugged individualism, opportunity, representative democracy, religiosity, and laissez-faire economics. America won its freedom from the British Empire against seemingly overwhelming odds to achieve equal opportunity and liberty and justice for all, perhaps divinely ordained. America is perceived as a beacon of hope to the world, a model of stable, competent, representative government, producing peace and prosperity, a shining city on a hill. At first, Smith's idealistic naivete is humorously indulged and mildly ridiculed. He's called Boy Wonder, Daniel Boone, or Don Quixote. But when Mr. Smith begins to take his job seriously by actually proposing a bill, he experiences some harsh realities of power politics and media sensationalism. He's challenged to advocate one good idea for the country to justify his political office. Smith proposes a boys' camp in his home district. His proposed boys' camp, however, conflicts with the graft of a political machine in his home state. he is falsely accused of corrupt self-dealing. Smith's filibuster in the U.S. Senate is the dramatic highlight of the story. Smith attempts to defend himself and save his boys' camp proposal by blocking the passage of a bill occupying the floor of the Senate for extended debate. The powerful Taylor political machine launches an all-out attack on Smith. It dominates the news media, radio, newspapers, and influencers. Edward Arnold plays Jim Taylor, the political machine boss. Smith is targeted by what we would call today fake news, alternative facts, and gaslighting. Taylor, the head of the political machine, calls it public opinion made to order. Finally, Smith, after many hours on the floor, is exhausted and defeated. But it's not enough just to flood public discourse. The Taylor machine goes further. Free speech and press is aggressively suppressed by violent, strong-armed toughs. We even see a fire hose used to break up a peaceful protest. Taylor's political machine will stop at nothing to win. In the end, we are disabused of Smith's naivete, and we must confront a fundamental question. Is democracy possible when the press and governing institutions are controlled by the rich, and powerful? This is part 2 of my comments about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. We'll be talking about the filibuster. Smith's filibuster on the floor of the United States Senate is the dramatic highlight of the story. A filibuster, coming from an 18th century word referring to piracy, is a parliamentary tactic used by a minority to stall or prevent a vote, because presumably the majority would win. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington fostered the myth of a lone senator using a parliamentary rule to courageously defy the majority, a minority voice standing on principle to dramatically block a tyranny of the majority. There are other ways of filibustering. Senators could place a hold on a bill or nomination. They could fail to report the bill or nomination out of committee, or object to a unanimous consent motion, be absent during a quorum call, or vote against a cloture motion. The Founding Fathers were wary of minority rule and intended the houses of Congress to be majoritarian, needing only a simple majority to conduct business. For example, the Constitution, in referring to Congress, states, "Each house shall be the judge of the elections, returns, and qualifications of its own members, and a majority of each shall constitute a quorum to do business." Alexander Hamilton, writing in The Federalist No. 22, stated, "To give a minority a negative upon the majority which is always the case where more than a majority is requisite to a decision, is, in its tendency, to subject the sense of the greater number to that of the lesser. Continuing, Hamilton stated, the majority, in order that something may be done, must conform to the views of the minority, and thus the sense of the smaller number will overrule that of the greater. James Madison, writing in the Federalist No. 58, stated, it has been said that more than a majority ought to have been required for a quorum, and in particular cases, if not in all, more than a majority of a quorum for a decision. Madison continued, in all cases where justice or the general good might require new laws to be passed or active measures to be pursued, the fundamental principle of free government would be reversed. Madison concluded, it would be no longer the majority that would rule. The power would be transferred to the minority. Were the defense of privilege limited to particular cases, an interested minority might take advantage of it to screen themselves from equitable sacrifices to the general will, or, in particular emergencies, to extort unreasonable indulgences. The rule that permits senators to speak for as long as they wish dates to Vice President Aaron Burr, who declared in 1805, that was about a year after his deadly duel with Alexander Hamilton, that the Senate was needlessly burdened by too many procedural rules. One rule, a motion to end debate on legislation, known as calling the previous question, was rarely used at the time, so the Senate dropped it in 1806. Although this potentially allowed unlimited speaking time without any means to cut off debate, filibusters were unusual in the 1800s. But in 1917, after a bill supporting World War I was filibustered by a group of 11 senators, led by Robert La Follette, a new rule was adopted. Senate Rule 22 required a 2/3 majority of senators present to invoke cloture on a matter on the floor of the Senate. During the 1900s, cloture motions usually failed to gain the necessary 2/3 vote. Filibusters were used by Southern senators to block civil rights legislation, including anti-lynching legislation. Two filibusters in particular served as the inspiration for the 1939 film Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. In 1935, Senator Huey Long opposed a bill to extend President Roosevelt's National Recovery Act. And in 1938, Mississippi Senator Theodore Bilbo filibustered an anti-lynching bill to protect Saxon civilization. Civil rights bills were filibustered repeatedly. Senator Richard Russell led a filibuster against a 1949 civil rights bill, and in 1957, Senator Strom Thurmond conducted the longest solo filibuster in history, over 24 hours, against another civil rights bill. Touted as a defense against a tyranny of the majority, democracy's finest show, democracy in action, the filibuster has most often been employed to prolong the status quo, prevent needed social reform, and promote special interests at the expense of majority will. Finally, after a marathon 60-day filibuster, the Senate invoked cloture disallowed passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. More recent Senate rule changes have weakened, but not eliminated, the filibuster. In 1974, the Senate eliminated the filibuster for budget bills meeting certain requirements, now a process called reconciliation. In 1975, the Senate reduced the number of votes required for cloture from 2/3 to 3/5, or 60 of the current 100 senators. In 2013, the Senate eliminated the filibuster entirely for federal executive branch and judicial appointments, other than the Supreme Court. But 4 years later, it eliminated the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees as well. And that brings us to today. Will the Senate finally eliminate its filibuster rule altogether? Thank you for viewing Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. This is Larry Giventer.